Welcome to the second of our centenary talks, the centenary of the time when Adela Curtis first bought the land, the 17-acre field here, which now is the home of the Othona Community, but which was for many years her home and the home of the community that gathered round her. We're here, a group of us in person in the chapel, many others joining us by Zoom from around the world, certainly including friends in America and New Zealand at the moment. And we're looking forward to the second of our series of talks given by Liz Howlett.
It's great to be with you once again. So the main focus for this talk, I've entitled it, In the Year 1939. So why 1939? Well, I mean, nationally and internationally, it was a really significant year, of course. But also, the key things for me that meant that 1939 was an obvious year to focus on was the fact that Miss Adela Curtis wrote a diary in 1939. She wrote something for almost every day leading up to the middle of September. And it'd be really, so I'm really looking forward to sharing some of that with you today. And also, as we heard yesterday, we've got letters that she wrote to her sister Clara, who was in America. So Cabot, who has joined us from America, it's about 3:30 in the morning there. So I don't blame him if he nods off during this. But he has shared with me almost 30 letters that Miss Curtis here wrote to her sister Clara over the years. So that really helps to flesh out the story as well. So we'll be hearing some more from those letters. And the other thing that isn't sort of local to here, but is really nationally important, is that the government took a mini census in 1939. It was the 20-something of September when they took it. So war had just been declared, but it was on the cards that war was going to come. And this was taken so that initially the idea was that they could gauge how many people would need ration books, so coupons. And it's really interesting that that register that was created in 1939, when you look at the pictures of it, you can see that it's been annotated. It was used, it was in constant use by the NHS up until their records were computerized, I think in the 1980s. So this document that was created in the 1939 was actually used and annotated for many years afterwards. But it's really, really helpful for finding out who's living here and who some of the people are who come and visit. So, you know, that's been really helpful. And it kind of made me think, okay, 1939, got to go with that year. So let's just rewind a little. We left the Miss Curtis. She produced her brochure in 1930, advertising the Bible Students' Colony, and that was the first time that the main house was seen as a community house rather than a family home. So what does she do? So in the 1930s, she actually moves out of the community house herself, and she moves into Littleness. This photograph that you can see was taken probably in the 60s or even later than that, but it's still the original when Tony first came here, and I think for the first 13 years that he was living here, he lived in Littleness also. It had been extended, but it was the same basic hut. And we will hear in a little while, you might think, oh, it's a bit of a demotion, but for her, it's the opposite. We'll hear in just a bit. And just to give an idea of other things that were happening during the 30s, we'll go back to the map that we looked at part of yesterday. We were looking at the western section of the map yesterday, and what I've done now, hopefully you can see that the main house is on the left-hand side, which is the west, and then there are various sort of boxes, and those are the dwellings that, and most of those are dwellings that other people had built during perhaps the late 20s and then certainly into the 30s. And I don't know if you can see, but there's a little footpath from the main house going towards the east up to a little square. That's up to Littleness. Yeah. And then there are others that sort of spread their way over. So other people are building properties, some of them to come for summer holidays, some build to live here permanently. So, and then the other big thing during the 30s, the biggest and most important building project in the 1930s is the building that those of us who are here with me, the room, the chapel, was built in 1937. And it was something that Miss Curtis didn't by any means have enough money to build by herself. And we'll see in a moment that the great list of people who helped contribute towards the building of it. But first of all, let's just have a look at this picture, which is of the interior as it was originally, with the original furniture. And I'm pleased to say that the lectern I'm using and this little table, I'm sorry you can't see that on the screen, but I'm using some of the original furniture today, which is lovely. So, and it was a great addition. I think it sort of marked an important stage in the kind of the community. So rather than Miss Curtis delivering her lectures and all their services in what they called the common room, the sitting room, they could have this room for those purposes. And I like this photo, which is the view of the house and the chapel when it looks to me like the chapel was fairly recently built. That's the view from Littleness. So every day when Miss Curtis went down the hill, that's what she saw from Littleness. So it's good to have that photo there. This next slide is a picture of, it's quite a big sort of plaque in a screen, in a frame. And it used to hang in the porch here in the chapel, and it gives the list of all the people who gave money so that the chapel could be built. And it's sort of in the names, which you may not be able to see very clearly, I don't know, are a kind of 3 levels. So you start at the top and you've got the wardens. And in the middle, you've got the Warden Maranatha. So that is the name that Miss Curtis gave herself. Then on the left, you've got the Warden Christiana, and that's the name for Lily Davison Chancellor, her greatest friend, and real partner in so much that she did. And the third warden is the Warden Emmanuel, and that's Sister Mary, and she has a plaque here also. So you get the wardens on the top. Then you get, the next row are the sisters. And I think probably the ones on the far left are what you would call members. So they are ones who are full term here and they're unpaid members. And then the others are here in certain degrees. And you'll see that there are brothers. There's Brother Herman and Brother Geoffrey, they're father and son. And Brother Geoffrey actually is Geoffrey de Pury, who has a plaque in the chapel. And his mother was Sister Margaret, and she's one of the ones on the far left. Another interesting thing to notice, and I hope you can see this at home, is that some of the names are two names. So you have, for example, Sister Ruth Edward and then Brother Edward Ruth. That seems to be the pattern where it's a married couple who are here together, you know, and they've become members to a certain extent, and they kind of take on each other's names as well, which I think is a really interesting facet of this. And through the 1939 register, I won't go into a lot of detail now, but through the register, I've been able to track down some of those people. And some are local, some come from Bridport. So we're going on to the lower list now. You know, the regular members of the public who felt that they wanted to contribute to a chapel being built here. Some are local people, live in Bridport. Some live further away. Some are quite well-connected people. And some have had connections with the community for a long time, you know, before they moved here. I suppose in a way it's sort of a bit like Othona, you know, that Othona here has built up local supporters, but there are people connected with Othona from Essex who's, you know, for whom this is still a very important place. You know, a similar sort of thing, perhaps. So, the chapel, it was built in 1937. In her diary of 1939, there are problems with the construction. The floor is cracking. The people who put it in say, oh yes, yes, you know, it does need doing, but they don't come and do it. I mean, that never happens now, does it? Anyway, so, you know, many of similar problems to community life or, you know, any kind of building life these days. So the next slide, I just thought it'd be interesting to note the changes, how the name of the place changes. So yesterday we saw that the main house started life as Little Farm, when it was going to be a family home. Then on the brochure, it was called St. Bride's Farm, so that was 1930. And these letterheads I've taken from letters that Miss Curtis wrote to her sister. And I've used the ones that have got dates so that we can just track the changes. So that first one at the top is dated 1932. And the address now is St. Bride's Community House. So it's changed from a farm. It's now much more, you know, this is a community living here now. Then the middle one is dated 1935, and the title has changed significantly. Now it is the Community of Christian Contemplatives. And she has written at the top, for her sister's information, new title of our constitution as registered at Somerset House as an international non-sectarian religious community. So that was a kind of, she felt that was an important sort of step along the way. And then the one at the bottom is 1939, and you'll see it's slightly different. It's the Christian Contemplatives Charity. And this was when she formed the charity, and this is the trust deed that was produced to do with setting up this charity. And what she hoped to do, this is in her own words, what she hoped to do with this charity, it was that this are the deed of trust by which her property, so the buildings, the main building, and including the copyright of her books, has been given to the nation as a perpetual trust for the purpose of maintaining at Burton Bradstock a centre for the contemplative life of intercessory prayer, Bible study, spiritual healing, and regeneration of the land. So that's what she was hoping to do. She, when you read things that she writes over the years, you get a strong sense she's wanting to find a way of perpetuating her work, making sure that the good survives, and she hopes that there'll be a person. She hopes for a long time there'll be a person who will come forward and do that. But I think perhaps she's realising, you know, and also by 1939, by the time that this is all happening, she's over 70, she's got heart trouble. I think she feels that by doing this, it's not relying on a person, it's stronger than that. And we'll come back to the trust deed in a little while. But now I just want to we saw who some of the important people were in her life yesterday. So let's just catch up with some people. And I think that, I don't know for sure because it's not written on the back, I think this is probably Lily Chancellor, because it looks like her to me from, I might be wrong, but it's just the way she sort of holds her head and the way she looks. So Lily was certainly a key person who continued to come here and be involved. And we will see in a minute that she does get mentioned a lot in the diary. But just before that, this is definitely a photograph of her. And I have to say, I wouldn't have recognised her. This is September 1937, and we know for sure that the person on the left with the umbrella, that is Lily Chancellor, and next to her is Miss Curtis. We know that because it's Miss Curtis's writing on the back, and this is one of the photographs that she sent to her relatives in New Zealand. I wouldn't have recognised Lily. I think perhaps she's been quite ill, and it was was taken actually just a year before she died. So she was here at the dedication of the chapel in early 1938, but she died in October 1938. So she is mentioned in the diary. I'll come to that in just a moment, but I just want to read the words that Miss Curtis writes at the bottom of the front page about her friend. So she's written this, in the aftermath of her death. I wish to place on record my deep and thankful appreciation of the inspiring help given to me for nearly 40 years by my beloved friend and colleague, Lily Davison Chancellor, whose title in the community was that of the Warden Christiana, by whose unexpected death our council, hereinafter mentioned, has been deprived of its most honoured name, although every member of the community is joyfully aware of the continuity of her spiritual presence. So heartfelt and wonderfully generous and loving words about her friend who died just when, things had sort of reached such a good point. And I wanted to, so she is mentioned in the diary. And I just wanted to mention some of those, the places. So this first This first one is the 19th of January. So she only died, so end of October, November, December. It's 2.5 months. Just a little extract. The 19th of January, Thursday. I am more than ever thankful for this quiet, peaceful hut where I feel at home with Lil. Only a visitor at Community House ever since I built it. So you get a sense there of the fact that I think Miss Curtis feels happier in one of the huts than the home, but also that she feels close to Lil. 27th of January, Friday. First second of consciousness more amazing than can be uttered. One moment only, but of such unspeakable joy as makes life seem like a pit. Twice this has come on waking and is gone like a flash of lightning, beyond recalling, except as an awe-inspiring memory and anticipation of the next life. And I believe it to be the answer to my intense prayer to know Lil's present state, not as theory, but as my own experience now. It is indescribable, beyond the reach of words, more real than anything on earth. May it come again and again, till it be forever. It leaves a speechless thankfulness and wonder. I have known ever since October the 30th that Lil was closer than breathing, this is in inverted commas, closer than breathing, nearer than hands and feet, in the unity of the Spirit, and the Spirit is underlined, and that I am learning through her more than ever the truth of love to get rid of all ugliness, sourness and dregs in me. 9th of February, Thursday. Wrapped into abstracted awareness of Lil this morning. Very happy. Felt an admonition to be more careful of food, not forget breakfast, and not be rigid about the rule if I can work more easily on an invalid diet. So I am obeying, and Sister Margaret is jubilant at getting fish tomorrow for my supper. I think there's a lovely sense, perhaps in both of those, that perhaps Lily was someone who could help her, you know, to sort of relax a bit and not be so hard on herself. And then those early weeks of the year, there's a lot of mention in her diary about having the tablet for the chapel. And so on the 16th of February, Thursday, memorial tablet fixed in chapel under window where Lil sat at the dedication. In thy presence is fullness of joy. So you can, those of you in the room can see it for real. So it's that second one in, and I'm pretty sure that is the first tablet to be put up here, because the next one along, I think, was then put, oh, you know, I think we ought to have one for Sister Eve, who had died earlier. So we can think that that's where Lil was sitting at the dedication of the chapel in 1938. And then just a bit later, 2nd of July, Sunday, double row of Lil's white lilies, so lovely, flowers of sweetness and light, like her. They bring her very near, and as always, with the deep, unearthly joy that came in her ministries, unlike anything else. Nothing languid in a Madonna lily, straight, strong, upright, radiant. The very memory of them, when indoors, away from the sight and scent of them, is an inspiration of courage, a call to the heights, a reminder never to go down to my suggestion of failure, disappointment, or sadness. So again, a sense that, you know, Lil is the one who's helping her not to fall into the pit of, as she suggests here, feeling that her life is a failure, or that, you know, that she's a disappointment. So some very precious extracts there from her diary about her beloved friend after her friend's death. So just thinking about who else is here. So the next slide, this is of Eve and Phil. So, and I've tried to find photos that are perhaps, you know, roughly of this era. And certainly the photo of the picnic on the beach. So it's Phil on the far right in the foreground. And she's sitting next to her aunt, Miss Curtis, the warden. And you can only just see a head behind the warden, but that is Lily Chancellor. And I know all this because, again, this is a photograph, a copy of which was sent to New Zealand. And we've got Miss Curtis's writing saying who the people are. And Miss Curtis is in charge of the ice cream. They knew how to do beach picnics well in those days. And I think it also gives a good flavour of the life that, yes, you know, it was demanding, but they could also enjoy themselves and enjoy where they were living, which is really nice to know. Who else is here? So we've got some lovely photos, and these almost all on this slide are thanks to Ali's family, Ali Bendy. And it's really nice to see some of the sisters in the flesh. So I know from other photos where the names are on the back that it's Sister Monica on the left, but I don't know anything more about her. She had left by the time they took the register here, so she isn't here, and we don't know a surname or anything, so still waiting to hear more about Sister Monica. I think possibly the one next to her is Sister Elizabeth, because Elizabeth is older than the others, but I don't know for sure. And then definitely it's Sister Evelyn on the front row on the right. And she's got a big smile on her face. It looks to me, so that is, it's her sister-in-law and nephew at the back. And it looks like their dog is making a bid for escape between the sisters. Can you see? Sister Evelyn is enjoying that moment, I think, as is Sister Francesca, who's on the far right. I don't know who the woman is who isn't in the habit, but it's John Bendy and his mother Beth are the others at the back in that photo. And then Sister Mary there in the middle. So that's Sister Mary Emmanuel. So on the plaque about the people who donated towards the chapel, she's the warden Emmanuel. And at the start of the diary, she's the one who's sort of in charge of the house here. And then the other picture is of Sister Margaret de Pury. And we hear a lot in the diary about those sisters, not so much about Sister Monica, but definitely Sister Elizabeth, Sister Evelyn, Sister Francesca, Sister Mary, and Sister Margaret. And Elizabeth and Francesca and Mary had all been associated with Miss Curtis before here. They'd been with her at Coldash, and some had even been with her in London before that. We'll hear tomorrow more about Sister Evelyn, but she was someone who came here rather than knowing about the community beforehand. And Margaret, I think, had got a bit of a connection with coal ash, but not as much as the others. And she and her husband had bought a plot of land here and built 4 winds. So she had property here, as did her son Geoffrey. He had his own hut as well. And Geoffrey makes an appearance in the diary. So he is in the Navy already, and but he comes home on leave, and so he's likely to be sort of staying in his hut, but he often comes over here for services and for meditation and to be part of the community. Isn't that a lovely picture of Ephraim Hussey? So he's a local and a fisherman and gardener, and he was here, I think I mentioned him yesterday. He helped with the heavy work, and I mean, he's mentioned probably as much as anyone else in the diary. I mean, he's doing so much work over here in the gardens, but I think also in the house as well. You know, I mean, he's a vital member of the community. And there's, I think John Bendy talks about Ephraim. He would go with the party down to the beach, and they'd go out fishing because he, you know, the party didn't really mind how many fish they got, but if they didn't get any, Ephraim was really fed up because, you know, I suppose he felt as a fisherman he'd failed. And then the other picture, so it's at the same picnic. Perhaps you can see that as the earlier picture, but there is a gap now, and the young man in the gap, sitting further back, that is Alan Bendy on the beach, apparently. So he would come down and join in things when he could, even before he became, you know, someone living. In this trust deed, this is what it is at the back. And so it gives an idea of the life. I guess, you know, this is the outward facing. This is what you want people to see about what's happening here. And there are 7 periods of worship during the day, starting at 5:30 in the morning and finishing at 8:30. All lights are meant to be out at 9 p.m. And John Bendy does say, you think, oh, did that really happen? John Bendy does say in his recollections about them having seven periods of worship in the chapel. There's also one thing that, just a few other things I'd like to point out. So at 3:15, there's Bible study and ministry. And judging from the diary, ministry means silent ministries, where people might be here in the flesh to be prayed with silently, the silent meditation, if they were wanting help with problems, you know, say physical or mental or whatever. But it would be a silent ministry, whether they were here or not. And Miss Curtis often talks about doing absent ministries. So people would write in and say, and they would pay, please could you perform these silent ministries for me, even though I'm at a distance. People, you know, I guess, found it helpful. And then, I don't know if you can read it, but one of the other things I wanted to point out is, so note 2, food is as divinely ordained in Genesis 1:29, except for invalids or guests. So what does that mean? Well, what it means is that it's a passage from the Bible, from the first book of the Bible, and it's towards the end of the first account of the creation of the earth and all the creatures and the humans in it. And this is God talking to the humans who have just been created. God blessed them and said to them, "Be fruitful and increase, fill the earth and subdue it, have dominion over the fish in the sea, the birds of the air, and every living thing that moves on the earth." And then verse 29, God also said, "Throughout the earth I give you all plants that bear seed, and every tree that bears fruit with seed. They shall be yours for food." So this is what she took to heart, as this was to be our food here. So no animal products, just fruit and vegetable, nuts, anything that bears seed. So a sort of proto-vegan type diet, I guess, that she felt was divinely ordained in the Bible, and that if it says it here, then that's what we do. So you can see that when she says, I think I'm hearing that Lil is telling me not to forget breakfast, you know, and to eat, and that I'm allowing myself an invalid diet, she can then take fish, because ordinarily she wouldn't. And what she eats is a key part of what she notes in her diary, and it becomes a stronger theme, it feels to me, as the year goes on. I mean, she does say, except for invalids or guests, so you don't have to come and stay here and just have the Genesis diet if you don't wish. But for members, it's what they're meant to be having. Then, number 5, land fertilization is by mosaic sanitation and Sir Albert Howard's compost system. So I think what she means by mosaic, so that's Moses, the law of Moses in the Old Testament, and I think that is about not putting diseased things into the ground to grow out of. So Albert Howard, so this is a book I found of his. It was up in our gallery, and it feels like up there we have a little treasure trove of old books from the library that used to be here in the time of the first community. So this book is Farming and Gardening for Health or Disease, Sir Albert Howard. So this was a community book. It's got Christian Contemplatives Charity stamped in it. It was in their library. I'm not sure that this is the actual book that she's referring to, because the date of this one is 1945. And the key thing about his method of compost is that you use all waste in your compost. Human waste as well as plant and food waste. That's the key thing. And I think he had got his ideas from seeing ways of compost in India. And that is what was used here. So they have earth closets. Miss Curtis thinks that flush toilets are a shocking waste of everything, the water and of the waste, because it could be put to good use to enrich the soil. And they certainly needed something to enrich the soil here. Really hard going. They needed good compost. And in 1939, she wrote this little pamphlet, The Compost Heap, which was notes of a lecture on food production, and she goes into it thoroughly there. And this is where so I was getting in a muddle. Excrement from diseased bodies, human or animal, should never be used for compost, nor dug into the soil. That was her strong belief. And I think she believed that that was part of the law in the first 5 books of the Bible. That's what she's talking about, mosaic sanitation. You shouldn't put diseased waste into the soil or try and grow things off it. Yes, that was a really if you read this, you get that a very clear message. That's a little bit about the life. As I say, as you might want the public to see, you know, this is a public document. We're going to hear a bit about her life in just a moment, more from her diary. But there's this really nice photo I want to show you first. This is, I think, from it's got to be the late 30s, early 40s at the latest. I would have thought the chapel is built, you can see it there. But you can see that they're digging their garden on the bit where maybe the reed beds are now, but on a bit that's very grown up now. But it's really good to see them at work in the garden. Yes, so what kind of life does Miss Curtis record in her diary? So I thought I would read out a day. I mean, I left this slide and what I was going to say blank for ages, because, you know, she's written at least 200 on 200 days. Which one do I choose? So I'm not saying that it's, you know, absolutely typical. It's just a day, and it's a day in January. It's January the 12th, which is a Thursday, and I'll read it to you, and we can just sort of reflect on it afterwards. You know, the sorts of things that she writes about. C, making a long-drawn, solemn moan with a minor cadence, like a curve of sorrowful mourning. And she's drawn a curve, can you see it on the page, to sort of show what she means about the sea. Prayer in night for Chamberlain with Mussolini. Kennedy has reported to Roosevelt, and this is inverted commas, European war inevitable. Close inverted commas. Sleepless from 1:30. Indigestion from supper of oranges and bread and butter. Got up at 4:20 and wrote on studies, in inverted commas, till 8 a.m. Brilliant 3/4 moon, clear sky and quiet sea at 6 a.m. Posted 7th after Trinity to Wadsworth for part 2 of studies. Only 2 more to copy now. We'll come back to what she's talking about here. Wrote long letter to Mrs. Lane to try to save her from herself. Frost last night, bright sun at 8:30 a.m. Blue sky, blue sea, blue mere, floods of light, walked 11 till 12, indigestion tiresome. Reflection of sun on sea doubles the brilliant light and immensely increases its area. Violet and pink anemones in full bloom and 4 blue buds of hepatica. Biscuits and mate at 12:15 and rest till 1:30. Walked till 2:30. Lecture 3 to 4 on land with address and silence before. Did it easily, vigorously, with no return of exhaustion. Sunlight at 4:20 and a stormy setting in thick, dark clouds. So that's a day early in the year. Lots about her surroundings and a lovely appreciation of the sky and the sea and the mere and the light. And I would say, judging from the ones that I've read, she writes more about her surroundings in this one, but there's something every day that she writes in the diary. She notes what time she wakes up. She makes a note of the weather when she wakes up and if it changes through the day. So, you know, she's got a fine eye for the weather. Prayer in Night for Chamberlain with Mussolini. I think that when I first read that, I thought, whoa, this is January 1939. I don't think I had realised that war was sort of in the air as early on in the year as that. But, you know, that was my ignorance. She mentions what she eats. So her supper from the night before, oranges and bread and butter. She always mentions her food, and I think I've said, and she gets more fixed about recording every single thing that she eats and drinks each day as it goes on. Now, she mentions also something that, if she's well, something that she does every day is writing. And that's what she will do as soon as she gets up. So if she gets up at 4:20, she starts writing. And the two books I can show you that she is mentioning here. So, posted 7th after Trinity to Wadsworth. Wadsworth are the printers. So this is the little book that she's talking about. And she's doing a series, she calls them Studies in the Collect, Epistle and Gospel for each Sunday in the year, with Christmas, Good Friday, Easter Eve and Ascension. So what she's doing is she's going through the old Anglican prayer book, where a prayer, a collect, and a passage from a New Testament letter, the epistle, and a gospel, either Matthew, Mark, Luke or John, a passage. Passages are set for each Sunday of the year, plus these important times like Easter and Christmas. She is writing a commentary on the reading, and this is part 2, includes the her commentary for 4 Sundays. This was issued in 14 parts. We have copies of them all. So that's the sort of thing that she was producing and also giving as a Sunday or during the week, yes, on a Sunday lecture. That would be that. And then the other one that she mentions, she actually does a lecture. So this is on a Thursday, a lecture in the afternoon on land. Well, that becomes, this is the divine law of the land. And we have 2 parts. This was also, and she anticipated that this would come out in 14 parts. I'm not sure that this one did. I can only find here the 2 parts, and I think copies of everything would have been kept. So I think possibly it didn't ever get to the 14 parts. But that's what so she is writing on one thing and she's delivering a lecture on another in the same day. And so she's always writing for, say, 4 hours in the morning. And she has what I would say is a very punishing schedule of giving lectures and leading services and doing ministries, very demanding. Anything else from the extract from her diary? Oh, wrote a long letter to Mrs. Lane to try to save her from herself. Well, I think, can't we all sometimes, there are people that we know and we think, oh, if only they did, you know, it can be so obvious to us what someone else needs to do, you know, to stop being a nuisance or whatever. So Mrs. Lane, the family Lane, it's Mr. and Mrs. Lane and their daughter Simone are living in one of the huts. And I think they had hopes that they would be staying here, perhaps. But in another part of the diary, it arises that I think Sister Mary or Sister Margaret has sort of had an interview with them, and she just doesn't feel that they're going to be suitable. And there's quite a bit about Mr. and Mrs. Lane in the diary and how they ought to live their lives. What else does she note in her diary? One thing that we did have in our very small archive already was a photocopy of an illustrated article that had been published in 1939. It was really exciting to discover in the diary about the person coming, the actual journalist coming and saying, you know, could I, I've got this photographer, could we come and write an article and take some photos? And from my point of view, I think that's great. You know, we've got these photos of the sisters at work and a little bit of rather bland, you know, sort of copy about them. But this is Miss Curtis's take on it. It's the 26th of May, 1939. Interviewed a Miss Margaret Shaw, who came to ask if she and a photographer friend might take views and see the place for a paper. Said, I must see proofs of her article, which she promised, after hearing the bad conduct of the reporter years ago. I think, this is me talking now, I think I have discovered the article in a paper that she's talking about, which was dated 1913. And it's, so the reporter has got wind of the fact that people are paying for silent ministries. And I think the journalist thinks, you know, he's got charlatans. And he gives a very sort of tongue-in-cheek, wicked write-up. He doesn't meet Miss Curtis because, and he says, oh, this is interesting for a school of silence. She's on the telephone. So the journalist ends up having a long conversation with Lily Chancellor and portrays her in a really unpleasant way. So I think that is what Miss Curtis is remembering. So Miss Margaret Shaw faithfully promised that she would show the proofs. So footnote, August the 10th, Miss Shaw broke her word and someone brought me her illustrated without any proof having been sent. No more journalists will be received here, unscrupulous. So, but for us, I think it's nice to have the photos, and you won't be able to see it, but the someone who knew the sisters has just penciled by them who they are. So the one at the weaving machine on the left, that's Sister Francesca. It's thought to be Sister Joanna, coming, the taller one on the right, coming into the chapel, the porch door. And it's Sister Elizabeth. It is Sister Elizabeth because it's printed, not penciled, doing at the spinning wheel. And then there are, there's those pictures as well of the chapel, which they call a tiny chapel. Well, come off it. It was even bigger than it is now. You know, originally this wall wasn't there. There was no quiet room, no gallery. It was all chapel. So it would have been huge, not tiny. But then you can see the sisters working in the garden, and Sister Evelyn taking a basket of washing down those outside stairs, which are on the outside of the building, outside of the kitchen. So no more journalists. So let's go back to the rector. So contact with the rector. He often is mentioned in the diary because he comes up every week on a Wednesday, unless he's poorly, to conduct a service of Holy Communion. And which, whilst they're waiting for the chapel still to be properly finished, he conducts in the common room. But he also comes in 1939, and they have contact with him in another way. And this again, I was sort of, it was really interesting to read this. So there he is, the picture of him that I'm showing you, that is from the Burton Bradstock Village website. And it's a picture that was taken when American troops were here during the war, and he's showing them a tombstone, whether it's relatives, you know, who, and it's actually an ancestor in the tombstone. I'm not sure. Anyway, he's in the graveyard there with a couple of Americans. This is the 6th of January, which is a Friday. Rector sent 3 gas masks for sizes and says, as this is a nil area, none are being supplied, but he will order them for us if we wish. He is ARP warden. Phil and Eve, who have been trained in London, so a reminder, Phil and Eve are the nieces, and they come down, I should have said when we had the photos, they come down once a month during 1939. They live in London. They come down for a weekend once a month. So they're regular in the diary. Phil and Eve, who have been trained in London, are fitting us all tomorrow and at 11, and I have ordered Alan, that's Alan Bendy, to superintend Hayward and Hussey, that's Ephraim Hussey, on digging trench shelter. So Mr. Dittmer, the vicar, he is also the ARP warden for the area. And so he's in charge of getting gas masks to people if they want them. And also they are instructed here to have dug an ARP trench shelter. And like, you know, if I said it all went swimmingly and they'd finished it in a week, honestly, it goes on for months, this building of this trench shelter. I think it must be really been a very difficult job because various people are tasked with doing it. And then there's heavy rain and the sides fall in, you know, because it's very clay soil. It is ready by September. But honestly, it's one of those sagas that goes on and on. So we'll move on. And I find it interesting. So another person who stays is this person called Marian Dunlop. She appeared, I mentioned her, it was her memories of Mrs. Chancellor, if you remember, that I read out yesterday. So she'd got links with Lily Chancellor, who, you know, is obviously important here, but also back in London. And Marian Dunlop, she was also influenced by the teaching of James Porter Mills, and she develops her own fellowship of meditation. So she set that up in 1932. And she wrote a book, An Introduction to Meditation, in 1929. And we hear that she has contact with this community for a very sad reason. Well, she had contact anyway, but the reason why she's mentioned is that she has 2 sisters, and the youngest sister takes her own life in 1939. And that's obviously a big shock to Miss Curtis, and also Sister Mary worked with Mrs. Chancellor in London and knew Marian in her own right. So she's the one who gets the letter, and they're all really shocked. And then Marian comes and stays here after the funeral for a few days. Not immediately after the funeral, but just a few days after. And then Sister Mary offers to go and help her. She's Miss Dunlop would have regular times when she was a great person for teaching others to be teachers of meditation. And so she would go away and have people gathered around her, say in a retreat centre, and teach teachers of meditation. And Sister Mary in 1939 goes and helps her on one of these because, you know, she's still, I imagine, still reeling from the death of her sister and she needs the help. Some of you may well know already that there is a house, Mary and Dunlop House in Dorchester. That's their headquarters. The Fellowship of Meditation is still going, and the book of her biography, Her Life Glimpsed, happens to be written by someone I know. He became the head teacher of the senior school that I went to in Taunton just after I left, and is a reader in the church that my parents went to and that I was part of, Jeremy Harvey. So I realised that the meditation group that Jeremy used to run in Taunton, well, he still does run it, that my mum used to go to, would have been carried out on Miss Dunlop's lines. So really interesting, isn't it? And with her, there's the same sense of using a sentence that might be close to scripture as part of your meditation. Okay, so we need to go back to the sisters now, because they disgraced themselves, sadly.